Shabbat Shalom, everybody. I'm sure that, like everybody else, we watched a lot today of the, this week. Sorry, my microphone just came out. Let's start again. We began this week with a incredible entry into this impeachment trial. And once again, we've been dragged into the memory of what happened. And once again, we saw all of the evidence of terrible things that people did at that mob on the Capitol. So, I'll tell you something. What I have been trying to figure out is, once again, it's one thing to understand how a mob can do what it did at the Capitol on January 6th. But the thing that I can never figure out for the life of me is why and how do millions of people in our society somehow believe that we have a conspiracy going on? How can so many millions of people fall for a conspiracy theory? When I hear of things like this in life, I try to find resonance in my own experience. And the truth be told, I have a hard time finding that in my life. I have a hard time because I think about my, maybe in my childhood when I was in elementary school, they taught me that Thanksgiving was a holiday where the Indians and the Pilgrims had a mutual gratitude festival. And of course, what I later discovered is that's a big lie. It was actually a much darker story. And this is a little embarrassing to admit, but I also sometimes like watching these documentaries about UFOs. Those documentaries that say that it was a great big government cover-up, that there were UFOs visited Roswell, New Mexico, and the government is hiding that from us. It's kind of fun to watch that. And, it's kind of fun to watch how people try to connect dots of scattered pieces of information in these unbelievably sensationalist terms. And of course, that's not what's happening at all. I don't believe it for a second. So again, how can millions of people in our society believe in conspiracy theories? That's what I want to investigate today. I want to investigate how is it that that happens and what the Torah tells us about this phenomenon. When Marjorie Taylor Greene says that Jewish lasers started the forest fires, and she espouses QAnon, we all know really what's going on here. QAnon is just a repackaging of anti-Semitism. And that the tropes of QAnon are the tropes of anti-Semitism that have been around for thousands of years. So that tells us something right there, that conspiracy thinking is probably as old as humanity. QAnon is just a repackaging of anti-Semitism plus racism plus bigotry in this horrible, horrible powder keg fueled by Trumpism and by the internet and by Fox News and places like that. It's a reality. But then again, the same question, what kind of sickness of the soul of millions of people in our society can lead us to believe in this nonsense? There was an article written in the New York Times a couple of years ago by the social psychologist Amy Cuddy, and she used what she calls the concept of envious prejudice. In a nutshell, she teaches that envious prejudice is the idea that every society has a certain group or groups that are not mainstream, but nevertheless achieve a great deal of success when it comes to intellect and wealth and achievement. And sometimes these non-mainstream groups are perceived as cold. In other words, they are more insular and they seem to be self-interested. Now, when times are good economically and in stability, the majority mainstream celebrates these groups, even though they're different. They begrudgingly celebrate them, but they recognize their achievements. But all it takes is any instability, financial or social strife of any kind, and the mainstream turns on these quote unquote cold, non-mainstream groups. So of course you see that with Jews always, and also lately in Asian Americans as well in our society. And they dredge up age-old stereotypes and lead to attacking them and to even to genocide. As Amy Cuddy puts it, she says, the stereotype competence of such groups when they are suspected or accused of cold ill will, suddenly represents a serious threat. Envy towards these groups becomes volatile, mutating into anger and spurring the most extreme forms of discrimination, intentional harm, and even annihilation. There was an article this week in the Washington Post that investigated the background of all of the people who were arrested at the Capitol Hill riot. And they found that 60% of the people who were arrested were experiencing financial woes. Either they owed back taxes to the government, or there were liens on their property, or they were deeply in debt. So there you go. That might indicate that there are a lot of these people who are turning their own sense of financial instability outward and blaming it on other people, seeing themselves to be the victims of a system that is out to get them. And of course, it ends up being the Jews and the Asians and the Muslims and others and the Blacks who are at fault, right? That's why, as Byron Katie once said, victims are the most dangerous people. So, you know, when Marjorie Taylor Greene said Jewish lasers started the wildfires, we all laughed, but we also know deep down it's no laughing matter. It is profoundly serious and lethal. I was watching an interview on the news with Nelba Marquez Green, who is the mother of a child who was murdered at Sandy Hook this past week. And she said something quite profound that is along the same lines. She said, when you look at the people who are, very often people who are gun right activists tend to be conspiracy theory people as well, who embrace racism and anti-Semitism. There seems to be the strange link between these various issues. And she noticed and pointed out that these people, in her opinion, are people who are simply denying their own pain. When you deny your own pain, you inevitably turn it outwards in blame. That's quite a profound teaching that I think we all have to think about. Those who deny their own pain are people who are most likely to deny truth. Those who deny their own trauma in their own lives are very likely to diminish the dignity of others who are experiencing trauma and isolation. Those who deny their own suffering are likely to try to diminish the justice for others who are suffering in our society. This week's Parsha is Mishpatim. It comes directly after the giving of the Torah. The giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai represents this incredible act of moral certainty, of giving the whole world moral certainty. Mishpatim, as I pointed out before, are all about more mundane topics, about how to get along in society. The Sfat Emet pointed out something very powerful. He said the 10 Commandments that we got last week represents our relationship with God. But Mishpatim represents our relationship with each other. And he also said something very surprising. He said, if you compare the 10 Commandments last week to the Mishpatim that seem much more mundane, actually the Mishpatim are on a higher rung, a higher spiritual level, even than the 10 Commandments. And how is this so? Well, he does it in the following way. He says, if you look at the Psalms 147, it says, Magid Devarav Yaakov, Chukav Mishpatav Yisrael. That God spoke his Devarav, his Aseret HaDibrot, his 10 Commandments to Jacob, Chukav Mishpatav, his Mishpatim to Yisrael. Now, if you remember, when Jacob wrestled with the angel, what name represents the higher level? It's Yisrael is higher than Jacob. So the 10 Commandments are for Jacob. The Mishpatim are for Yisrael, the higher level. And the Sfat Emet points out that the name Yisrael doesn't just mean struggling with God and prevailing. The name Yisrael also can mean Yashar El, which means, like Yashar Koach, it means straight to God. A direct path to God is the Mishpatim. So what does this mean? Bear with me as I explain. Jacob is always a little twisted, isn't he? Jacob is a man of lies. He's a man of deceptions. He's never straightforward, and he struggles in order to straighten himself out. It's the Jacob in all of us that needs the 10 Commandments, that needs to be hit over the head with the direct commandments. You shall not steal, you shall not lie, you shall not cheat. These are the direct messages for that part of us that is always going to be falling for lies and being twisted. But the Torah doesn't want us to stop there. The Torah wants us to continue to evolve to a higher level, to the mishpatim, where we are straightened out as a people, as a society, and as a world. It's a higher rung. In other words, mishpatim represents that the greatest and most evolved society is one that lifts up the rule of law above the mob mentality that is always falling for lies and for manipulations. The Sfat Emet says it beautifully. He says, our job is to livarer et hasheker ha'emet mitoch hasheker. We have to lift up truth from the midst of the lies that somehow are always there, are always present. So what do we make of all this? I started with the question, how is it that millions of people can believe in conspiracy theories? What I want to share today is that actually it's the wrong question. Falling for lies, believing in conspiracy theories seems to be unfortunately built into our human frailty, to our human nature. We've always been doing this. As Nelba Marquez Green pointed out in that interview, we all want to deny pain and suffering. We want to ignore it. And that leads to believing in conspiracy theories and to denying justice for others. It's a fault of our human character. So the real question is not why does it happen? It happens. The real question is what do we do about the fact that this is the ultimate spiritual pandemic in humankind, to believe in lies and to spread lies? The answer quite simply is Torah itself. The Torah teaches us that we must constantly work in every generation, in every year, in every moment to lift up the rule of law, because people are always going to fall into lies. We've just lived through 4 years of constant attacks on the rule of law, on the lifting up of decency of our democracy and our society. We've witnessed how much the rule of law has been devastated, as evidenced by what happened on January the 6th, as what they're trying now in Congress to show in this impeachment trial. And even though it's likely to be of no avail because there is the presence of lies, that doesn't mean that we don't have a clarion call right now, that we have to constantly work to lift up the rule of law, of democracy, to protect our freedoms and our rights and human dignity at all moments of our lives. The truth is, there always have been, and for the foreseeable future, there will always be millions of people who will believe in lies, who will welcome lies and conspiracy theories. It's for this very reality. It's because of this very undeniable fact of human beings that the Torah has lifted up in our human experience, has appeared to address this very fault in humanity. This is why there is collective wisdom to respond to this, not just in Judaism, but in all the great religions of the world. And this is why our secular world has produced democracy as well. They're all different facets of the same thing. It is a response of holiness, of affirming life in the face of the lies. And just as we need an inoculation against this pandemic, we have to constantly inoculate ourselves over and over again against our propensity to believe lies with the rule of law, simply to stop lies in their track. Thank God, after January 6th, despite the efforts of the mob, our rule of law, thank God, has prevailed. That we all see what's happening now this week in Congress. It is very precarious. It is so precarious. That's the sobering reality that we have to live with every day and every moment. But I want to leave us with a hopeful message that yes, we never can let our guard down, but it is possible to overcome a world of lies. It is, that's the message of Judaism. We have to constantly lift up leaders and vote who represent the rule of law, who represent the idea that the rule of law is nothing less than sacred in lifting our humanity up. We are the people who have been given Torah as a pathway toward creating a world where a rule of law can prevail. In other words, we are B'nai Yisrael. Our very role in the world is to be the people who teach the world that we're capable of being more than our Jacob, our source of lies. We can become Yisrael. We can achieve that direct path to everything that God stands for. May we be given strength and never diminished hope in that struggle for bringing ourselves and the world to truth. And may that goal of truth come to us and be a blessing speedily and in good time. And we all say, Amen.